Welcome back, everybody. For those who were here last week, you will know that we started last week a series called What I Want. If this is your first time, welcome. It's going to be interesting. Hopefully, you will not fall asleep. That is my goal. I always like to tell people, and I haven't done it yet, this is my third week, and I'm trying to find my rhythm here, but one of the things I always want to encourage people to do when we come to a teaching time like this is to don't hesitate to take notes. If you use your phone a lot, grab your phone, just put it on silent so I don't make an example of you at some point, but take notes, write things down, engage with what we're talking about here with your small group of friends or with your spouse, somebody that you know. Don't just take my word for things. In fact, it is okay to look at things a little bit different, and then let's talk about that. So please take some notes, write some things down, and if you would like to go to last week and see where we started off leading us up to today, you can do that through our website. It's been redesigned. There's a little bit of a change in there, but you can see the messages from last week on there. This one will be posted somewhere in the middle of the week, so please don't hesitate to do that. And also check out the website from time to time because it's in the middle of being updated and a little more user-friendly for all of us. So that's a few things. I heard a yay, so all right. So we're in this, what I call a series, and I like to use the words episodes because I like TV. So we're in the second episode of What I Want, and this, starting where we were last week, is because I believe that regardless of your age, your teen years, your 20s, your 30s, there's always going to be something that is next, something that I want. There are things within us that drive us to create something new or to make change. Something has to happen. And it's not just in our 20s and 30s. It's beyond that, 60s, 70s, 80s. There's always that something else in life. And I believe that these are some of the common things that people want. And for some of you, you may disagree that you don't want some of these things, but we can argue about that later, but I think today's is foundational, and that is this, that I believe people have a need or a want to have a life that is significant. I've yet to meet anybody come up to me and tell me, Pastor Ben, I really just want a mediocre life. And I am okay doing absolutely nothing with life and to be completely forgotten even before I'm gone. I've never heard anybody say that. We all want a life of significance of something. And when we think about a significant life, a word that's often used is we want a great life. And so what is a great life? I was thinking of that this week. And so I did a little research. And like most people, I just hit the interwebs. And so I started to Google and look up who are the greatest people of all time. And that was quite a list. And so I narrowed it down to the last decade to see who the greatest people of the last decade are. And there were some common characteristics with everybody on the list. And three of the things really stood out that all of these people have. One is fame. The greatest people they listed were famous. There wasn't a single person on the list that I did not know. For most all of them, they had some sort of fortune. And we all have a fortune of some sort. Some is just more financially fortunate than others. But the other was that everybody that was listed has people that follow them in some way. So fame, fortune, and followers. And as I looked over the people of the decades, some of them really stood out. So I want to share with you some of the ones that I noticed that were the most, or the greatest, or the most influential. And two of them that stood out were former presidents, Barack Obama and Donald Trump, were one based on those metrics. Regardless of what you think about politicians, they were on that list. As was the founder of Amazon, Jeff Bezos. He is on the list, and I think he's about to shoot himself into space. Is it this week? Oh man, that would scare me. I get scared just flying, let alone going into space. Another person you may know, Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft, was on that list, but so was one that I really like, Simone Biles, who is a gold medal gymnast for the United States. She was in the last Olympics. She's got these endorsement deals, incredible young woman. Another one that I like, because my childhood kind of comes up, was the WWE wrestler, but he's an actor. He's in everything now, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. I like him. I follow him on Instagram. He is hilarious. So is a good friend of mine by the name of Taylor Swift. as I call her, T Swift. And some of you might not have any idea who that was, but that's all right. She's a very famous musician. But I wanted to know more about these people and decided to rank them based on certain metrics as to who really is the greatest. And the one that I chose, because they all have fame and they all have a fortune of some sort, so I chose followers. Who is the greatest based on followers? And I used Twitter as a metrics for this. And so just to share with you, at the very bottom of this greatness list, unfortunately, was Simone Biles, because she only has a little over 1.2 million people following her on Twitter. Only 1.2. Jeff Bezos doubles that, with 2.4 million people following. And then there's this huge jump from 2.4 to 14.5 million people that follow The Rock, the wrestler, who, again, he is hilarious on Instagram if you're an Instagram person. You have another big jump from him, and you get Bill Gates with 55, just a little over 55 million people following him. Then you take another jump by about 30 million to two people who are really close to one another. One is T Swift, Taylor Swift. She had 88.5 million people following her. And then former President Trump had 88,700,000 following him before he got suspended from all of those things. Which means in the last decade, according to the metrics online, President Barack Obama was the greatest person at almost 130 million people that follow him. And so, just so you know, I have 1,300 people that follow me on Facebook. And not just Facebook, I have 342 not 40, 42 on Instagram, and a whopping 197 on Twitter. So I'm getting close. What's that? Just a few zeros. Zeros don't count. Here's the thing. When we think about greatness, and we think about the idea of those sorts of people are great, if we use that as a measuring stick, the reality is virtually nobody else will ever live up to that measurement. So there has to be another way to define greatness for us, which is what we're going to get into today by looking at some of the stories that Jesus told. Because if it is all about fame and fortune and followers, then let's face it, most of us don't stand a chance. And for some of you, I know what you're thinking already, because you're thinking to yourself, well, Ben, I don't use those to measure greatness. I use something else. And that is great. And maybe what you use is what I use. But often people say, you know what? A great life is really a life around somebody who changes the world, which sounds great. It's a great thing to say we want to change the world. But let's be honest and say that to change the world sounds really, really huge. And for the most part, none of us know exactly what it takes to completely change the world. And so I want us to focus a little bit more closer to home and how do we become great in our world by looking at some of the things that Jesus says, some things that he defined as great. Now, before I do that, I just want to tell you this. I have yet to see in the scriptures where Jesus condemns people for trying to do great things. There is some sort of desire and drive within all of us to excel, to be excellent in what we do, and to do great things. And we are to follow that, but we have to have some warnings with it. Jesus isn't telling you to not be great. In fact, I think more people need to be great so that this world is a whole lot more like Jesus designed it to be. And you just need to know this as well, that if you're a follower of Jesus, I want you to pay attention today, because these things that we're going to talk about, he says to his disciples and says to us. If you're not a follower, that is okay. I still want you to pay attention, because some of these things I'm going to talk about, trust me, if you're just looking for some tactics on how to do things great in life, this is great stuff, even if you're not a follower yet. So go ahead and just pay attention to this. But I'm going to start by talking about a little incident in Matthew chapter 18. Jesus is there. He is with his disciples. They're standing around. They're having a meal. They're always with each other. And it says this, that about that time, they were all gathered together. The disciples came to Jesus and asked. It didn't say which disciple, but it said the disciples said, Jesus, which of us is greatest in the kingdom of heaven? So you can see 2,000 years ago, people struggled with the concept of wanting to be great, right? It's just not a modern thing. It has been a thing since man started to breathe. We want greatness, and the disciples want to know from Jesus' perspectives, teacher, we're all here, who's the greatest? And I can imagine, it's not written down, but I can imagine Peter, who is there. We talk about Peter a lot in church because he is he's the rock that the church was built on. He is the one that is outgoing, who is willing to try things. And Peter's probably thinking to himself, of course I'm the greatest, right? I walked on water. None of you did it. Sure, I only took 2 steps and then I fell, but I did it. So obviously I'm the greatest. And I can also imagine John, when you read John's gospel, he describes himself as the disciple that Jesus loved. And so I can imagine John thinking to himself, well, of course I'm one of the greatest, or the greatest, because Jesus loved me. And then I can imagine Bartholomew thinking to himself, of course I'm not the greatest, because nobody in church even knows that there was a disciple named Bartholomew, let alone how to spell it. But that's what they're doing. They're sitting there. Jesus, who is going to be the greatest? And it's not just them. I'm going to tell you, it's not just the individuals. It's also people that love them get into this same act. If you go a couple chapters further into chapter 20, check this out. This is from one of the mothers of 2 of the disciples. It said this, the mother of James and John, the sons of Zebedee. Also, in some of your scriptures, it'll say in different parts where they were also called the sons of thunder, which is an incredible nickname. And if I ever had one, that would be great. The son of thunder. But here they are. James and John, the son of Zebedee. She came to Jesus with her sons. She knelt respectfully to ask a favor. She was very respectful of Jesus. What is your request, he asked. And then she replied, in your kingdom, please let my 2 sons sit in the place of honor next to you, one at your right and one at your left. So this is a humble request, but this is a lot like the parent that goes to the coach and says, you know, my kid really is the best one on this team, and they really should be in there a whole lot more, right? Or my kid is the one that has the best voice in the whole choir. They should sing a solo. I mean, that's kind of what this is. She's there. She has put a request out there. And it was important, just so you know, the idea around the table is because in that day and age, when you had a meal and you had a bunch of people there, the ones who sat next to the host were the most powerful people in the room. They were the most important. And so it's natural. She wants her children to be the greatest. She wants them to have the status and the fortune and the fame and the followers. But Jesus turns it upside down, as Jesus always did in those days. And if you allow him, he turns it upside down still today. He's about to give them a gauge on how to measure greatness. And before I tell you it, I want to ask you this. If you were to write down, you don't have to write it down, but think about it. If you were to name 2 things that would indicate greatness in somebody, what would it be? 2 things, just real quick. The first things that come to your mind, I'll give you just a moment. You got it? Okay, let's see if you match up. Let's see how Jesus responds to his disciples, to the disciples' mother when it comes to greatness. So we'll go back to the very beginning one. They said, Jesus, who is going to be the greatest among you in your kingdom? And this is the response, the very next verse. Jesus called, they said, to a child that was there with them. And he said, come and put the child here with me. And then he said to the disciples, I tell you the truth, unless you turn from your sin and become like little children, you will never get into the kingdom of heaven. So a pause real quick there. You realize they asked the question, how am I going to be the greatest in your kingdom? Now, we know that there's multiple kingdoms that we can talk about, but he's talking about his kingdom. So the very first thing he said is, you need to come and have a faith to be great in my kingdom. But beyond that, the part that also is great for people who don't believe in Jesus, he said this, anyone who becomes humble as this little child is the greatest in this kingdom. So the first gauge that he gives is humility. Anybody have that? 1, 2, a couple of you. Humility. Nobody at the first service got it, so you guys are good. Humility is the first one. He answers this question by looking around the room, looking around where he is, and he says, hey, you want to know the answer? Hey, see that kid? Hey, come on over here. If you want to be great, you need to be like this little kid. Like this little kid who's busy looking down and not looking forward, but is fully present in the moment. You need to be like this little kid. And the disciples, again, I can imagine because of their cultural bias, are thinking to themselves, what are you talking about, Jesus? Because children back then weren't great. Children were just necessary to extend the family trade or the lineage or the property. And if you were lucky, you hoped that you would have a firstborn son that was honorable, that could carry your name forward. But they weren't necessarily worshiped and revered like we do now. We all think our kids are great, right? Okay, I'm going to tell your kids that no, nobody said right. But back then, it wasn't a big deal. I can imagine the disciples thinking, what do you mean, this kid? Why should I be like this kid? And Jesus says, listen, if you want to be like this kid, be great. You need to be like this kid, and you need to come and humble yourself. You need to repent, which is our word for completely changing, turning around. It's this idea of acknowledging who you are and what you've done and decide, and not just decide, but then to actually take the step to be something different. You need to repent and then humble yourself like this child. If that's what you will do, then you will be great. Do you want to be great? Now, I want you to know this as well. Humility, which is what he calls for, actually is the root of the word humiliation. And these two go hand in hand. And this is a scary part for some of us because none of us want to be humiliated, right? But when we're talking about humility, you are all smart enough to know that Jesus isn't calling us to look for times to be humiliated. He is looking for times for us to be humble. He's not telling you to make sure that you go out there and humiliate yourself. In fact, I love the way that C.S. Lewis describes humility, and that's what I'm going to use here. He says, true humility is not thinking less of yourself like you're humiliated. It is thinking of yourself less. True humility is not walking around thinking, you know what, I'm not good at anything or I'm terrible or anything. True humility is not when somebody gives you a compliment to say, oh, I'm not that. True humility is being able to think of yourself and say thank you, but begin to think of yourself less. And that is hard to do. Well, I can't speak for you. I can speak for me. That is hard to do. Because we live in a culture that I sometimes fully embrace, and I call it the selfie-centered culture. Now, selfie is a fairly new word to us, I mean, in the grand scheme of words, but it has been added to the Oxford Dictionary within the last 5 years or so. And a selfie is basically, because we have phones with cameras on it, we turn them around and we take our pictures, and there's always something interesting that happens when we take selfies. I took one this morning. Right out here, and I posted it on a Facebook page to let people know that I was here in the steeple and all that. But there's something incredible when you watch, especially young ladies, take selfies. And guys do the same thing, but I see it more because I had daughters. I saw it in them, is they could be normal with their normal faces, and then all of a sudden you get the camera in front of them, and their faces change. Have you seen this? Yeah, the pouty lips and the filters that make you look like you're not like you are. But listen, it's not just the ladies, because I do it. When I take a selfie, I take it from up here. You know why? Because it helps hide all this extra chin that I have. We are in a selfie-centered culture. And you can take selfies with filters, selfies that make you look completely different. I took one recently with an app that made me look like a cartoon character. I was going to show that with you. It kind of makes me look like a younger version of my dad, which, hey, my dad's a good-looking younger guy. But it's not just us. This isn't a modern concept, because I came across one of the oldest selfies that there is, and it started around 1900 when cameras were still new. I'm going to show you this selfie. It's a nice lady. I know it's hard to see. Their camera qualities weren't quite like our iPhones. But she is standing there in the mirror. She's got her nice dress on. And what's hard to see is on the table is her camera, sitting there taking a picture. And she looks wonderful. Although, you know, if I were to give her some pointers, it would be, hey, you know, maybe if you turn your hips just a little differently, and smile, because she doesn't look like she's smiling. And if you could get the camera a little bit higher, shooting down, but otherwise you go, girl, right? We are a self-centered culture. I mean, think about it. When you get a family photo and it finally comes in, or you look at it, who's the first person you look at? When I get one, it's me. And I got to tell you, if I look at that photo and my hair looks great, whatever is still there of it, and I look good and my shirt's good, then we nailed it. It doesn't matter if my kids are cross-eyed and one of them's not looking at it and the dog's doing something weird. As long as I look good, then the picture looks good. Come on, I'm not the only one, am I right? Come on. Some of you husbands are afraid to admit that one. It is our human condition to focus on ourselves, and yet Jesus says to be humble, to be selfless, to be less focused on ourselves. In fact, the Apostle Paul, he wrote about it this way, and in what he was talking about gives us just a few, if you will, some practical things to help us learn to be humble. He said this in his letter to the Philippian church. He says, listen, don't be selfish. Don't live to make a good impression on others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourself. Don't think only about your own affairs, but be interested in others too and what they are doing. I want you to know, it is okay to make a good first impression. We want to make good first impressions, right? But what he's saying here is don't make the first impression so pivotal that you worship the idea of your image management to the point where that is the most thing that's important. If you're always thinking, I wonder what they think of me. I wonder if they like me. I wonder if they like my hair. I wonder if they like my shirt. I wonder if they like the way I preach. That is a dangerous place to live if that's where you were stuck. You have to get beyond it. This verse gets to some of the how. It's not enough to just be humble, but there's some practical things to help you achieve that. And one of the things he mentions right off the bat is actually learn to be interested in other people and not just fake interest, because I am as guilty of this as some of you, asking interesting questions, although what I'm really doing is asking questions so that I can figure out what I'm going to tell you next. No, ask questions and listen. And be interested in what somebody has to say. Be interested in what they're doing and what they're going through. And one of the ways to actually ask these sorts of questions is to find out about something, then express an interest and ask for details. Hey, you do that for work? What does that mean? Teach me something. That's a way to be humble, to actually invest in people that way. Another part is to get outside of yourself, and we all kind of know this, to do something. And I have found, just in general in my life, when I don't feel like doing anything, when I am feeling pretty down on myself, I have learned that just doing something for other people helps. In times where I don't feel great, or when I don't feel like I am great, doing something for somebody else helps me at least feel better. So it's a great narcissistic way to do it, right? But at least do something for other people. Look for things that bring them joy. Serve other people. Look for ways to be generous to people. That is a practice of humility. And then one other final way to live humbly is to pray for humility. But be careful. We've always said, pray to God for what you want. But be careful, because to pray for humility, if you're not careful enough to do some of the practices, may eventually lead to God humbling you. And I've been there. Pray for humility. Practice humility. One of the practices that I have that I'll share with you now, and I probably won't talk about it for a long time because I don't like talking about those things. Why? Because I'm humble. All right? By the way, do you know who the greatest person in the world is? You wouldn't know, right? Because if they're humble, they're not going to talk about themselves. But one of the practices I do is when I arrive at church on a Sunday morning, and by the way, when I arrive on a Sunday morning, the parking lot is completely empty. There's the greatest parking spots in the world out there, but I try to choose one that is the furthest away. I do so that others who are a little more mobily impaired, or maybe they have children, I want them to be able to park closer. In fact, I hope that we as a church can start to embrace some of that too. But here's the thing, I want you to know that I don't do it because I'm just this naturally great, humble guy. I do it, and I've created a practice of it because I want to be a humble guy. So what are some of the practices of humility? This gauge is important. Our culture is telling us to be great, you got to have fame and fortune and followers and recognition, anything but humility. That other stuff, it's going to be what gets you ahead, right? Yeah, it might. But Jesus calls us to cultivate humility because humility is where God works best. God works best when there's room within us, and it's tough for God to work when we are so full of ourselves. God works best when our arrogance is shut off. Practicing humility opens us up to wisdom. It opens up to creativity, to being able to be taught, to be able to become who God created for us in our lives. So that was the first gauge, and some of you got it. Way to go. I'm going to move on to the second one. And the second gauge comes from Jesus' response to the mother who asked if her sons can be the greatest. And this is what he says. He looks at her, looks at them, looks at us, and says, whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first must become your slave. For even I, the Son of Man, what he's saying is, even I, God himself, came here not to be served, but to serve other people and to give my life as a ransom for many. So Jesus measures greatness by humility and servanthood. How many of you had servanthood as one of your two? Some of you same people. Did you see my notes beforehand? Yeah, humility and servanthood. You read the book. Servanthood. That's making me laugh. Jesus says, whoever wants to be the leader among you, whoever wants to be the greatest among you, must learn to be a servant. Want to be great? Serve. If you want to be thought of as great, at home, at work, at church, your community, serve. If you truly want to be great at work, serve the people you work with. If you own a company, if you are a supervisor, you want to be a great supervisor, serve your people more than you manage your people. Here's the thing is, if you serve, I got to tell you, it's not a matter of if you will be considered great or if you will be thought of as a leader. If you serve, you will be considered great. You will be considered a leader. Too many people want leadership responsibility. They want to be that great leader. They want to be recognized. They want all of the accolades for that leadership and greatness without actually carrying the burden and the responsibility of it and the servanthood. True leadership is not upfront recognition and praise. It's not about fame, and it's not about fortune. It's not about followers. It's about serving. And when I think of this, I think of some of the conversations that I've had with some of you over the last couple weeks, and I'm looking forward to getting to meet more of you in the coming months. But I think about a group of people that I met last week. You may know this might be brand new to you, but on Wednesday afternoons, there's a group of ladies that meet here in the basement of the back building over there, and they sew. And they sew quilts, and they have cake when it's somebody's birthday, which was delicious. But I gathered with them, and I had cake, and I started to ask questions. I started to hear. I hardly had to ask anything because they just started to tell me about what they do and why they do. And when they told me that the reason why this started was because they heard from people in hospitals that there are young women who are giving birth, having children, who are single parents, and they show up there with no support. Or there are homeless women who show up there to have a child, and they have nothing of physical value to actually give their child. They thought this should not be. And they create quilts at least so there is something warm to wrap a child in. And when I heard this story, I was amazed and at the same time a little ashamed. Ashamed because I grew up thinking that when anybody has a child, their experience was the exact same as mine. Although obviously I didn't actually birth the child, but I was there. And it was joyous, and it was wonderful, and family was there, and it never dawned on me that other people don't have that. And yet when they heard it, they took it upon themselves to make sure that at least in some small way, a mother has something to give their child. You want to know what greatness looks like? Come here on a Wednesday afternoon and just peek through the window on the door. That is what greatness looks like. And that's just one example that I have seen in this last couple weeks. And I've seen a few more, but I'm not going to tell you them all right now because I want to tell you more as time goes on. That's what greatness is. Listen, don't waste your life. You can serve your neighbor. You can do something for them that, yeah, they could probably do it for themselves, but serve them. If you're a student, you can serve people in school simply by looking for the one who is the outcast that nobody wants to be around and befriend them. You can serve. You can serve within your church. You can serve with children and youth that school is starting back up. If you feel like you can't physically get out to do things, you can serve by actually making it a point to do something that I do as well. I calendar on my calendar on the 1st of the month and the 15th of the month. And I do it because if I put something on my calendar, then it's important. You know, if something is important to do, you write it down. And what I do is I make sure that I write down on the 1st of the month, I pray for this group of people. And there's some churches and some friends that I haven't seen in so long. And then on the 15th of the month, I pray for our bishop and our cabinet and a handful of other people as well. I pray for you also. But I make it a point to do so, to write it down. Do something great. A phone call could be it. An email could be it. If you want help learning how to do this, you can email or call us up here. We'd be glad to help you. But my assumption is that many of you are adults with an incredible imagination that can come up with ways of your own to simply serve. You can do something significant with your life, regardless of where you find yourself in life, and not just significant here, but eternally significant in the lives of others. And Jesus said, the way to do this is through humility and through servanthood. So Jesus didn't just say, be humble and serve. No, you need to know this. Jesus embodied it. He believed in this so much that he came down and lived this. On the very last night, what we call the night of the Last Supper, the very last thing, he is there. He knows what's to come, and he could very well have given his disciples a sermon and 3 points to write down of the most important things. And yet what he chose to do with the very power of God within him was to wrap a towel around his waist and get on his hands and knees and wash the dirty feet of his friends. Serving in humility. That's what Jesus lived. And so if you want to have a significant life, with the life that you have, then follow him. May you this week embrace these two metrics of humility and service. And when you do, may you start to experience changes within you, changes within your world around you, and just possibly the world beyond. Be great with one another. Be humble. Be a servant. And I ask you to do that in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.